Thanks for joining us on this bank holiday. Let's get into our first topic right now. Should the Tories bring back Boris Johnson? 0207 862 2222. That's the number for your calls. The former Prime Minister's allies are reportedly trying to oust Kemi Badenoch and convince Boris to return to frontline politics. They're concerned about the party's future following poor local election results earlier this month. Plus, a new poll has put the Tories in fourth place. Reform still on top, then followed by Labour and the Lib Dems. One senior Tory told The Sun that Boris is the only one who can take on Nigel Farage and win. Badenoch has played down the idea. Have a little listen.
So I love Boris. He sends me, lots of messages, gives me lots of advice, Ian Duncan Smith, like David Cameron. I have great people who have been in this situation before, who've dealt with difficult times. So it's up to him what he wants to do. I have to focus on my job, which is making sure that Keir Starmer does not do more than the damage that he's doing right now.
I mean, what do you reckon, Lynn? Is it just one of those names that we will keep returning to until he decides to step back into politics?
I mean, I hope he doesn't. It's like being on a roundabout that just won't stop and you can't get off. I just think a lot of the criticism and how Keir Starmer has his rebuttals is constantly saying 14 years of Tory failure, and a lot of that is attributed to Boris Johnson. He did countless U-turns. Have we forgot about that? He lied so many times.
He was actually only Prime Minister for a tiny portion of those 14 years, wasn't he?
He did, but he was, one of the key figures when it came to Brexit, when, a lot of his views, policies and opinions were
He got Brexit done.
He didn't really get it done, though. Why people like Boris is not because of his policies or even his conservative ideals, which are lacking, in my opinion. It's because of his beerometer, this term that we've heard that they can imagine going and having a beer with him. He's charismatic. He's a good speaker. He meets the people where they're at. But him as a politician, when it comes to being a strong Conservative, is inadequate. Even his own peers, his advisor, Dominic Cummings, said he's like an out-of-control trolley, veering from position to position, hence why he had multiple U-turns. Jeremy Hunt said he lacks integrity, he lacks vision. Are we really going to go back? It just shows the state of the party that we have to return to someone that, wasn't a good Conservative for the Conservative Party.
It strikes me that the things you're describing there, that charisma, that, relatability, is exactly what people are responding to in this poll in Nigel Farage. They're seeing that in Nigel Farage, someone that they feel is relatable, that would sit and have a pint with them, that has got a personality, that is clear in their messaging as well. That feels like exactly what the Tories are missing.
But after you have charisma and, personality, you have to also have the policy and the strength to go with it. The same people were fed up of his whole, how he was with his own politicians, supporting corruption to a degree. That's not what people want. People want a fresh new start. They want change and they want integrity. And Boris Johnson didn't have that.
Wouldn't this just be an admission, Michael, if Boris Johnson returned to frontline politics, that trust doesn't matter anymore? After Partygate, to choose somebody as a leader who let us down so visibly and so badly when we were all following the rules.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump just got elected president, didn't he, for the second time? So I suppose trust does matter in that it's better to be trusted than not trusted. But at the moment in politics, the worst thing to be is ignored. Right, so there is an attention economy. Everyone's competing with all the different channels, all of social media, what Twitter video is out, what TikTok video is going viral. And unless you're a big personality, unless you can grab attention, because it's not going to be given to you for free, you are just going to be, I suppose, dead in the water. And the problem for the Tories at the moment is no one's even considering them. It's not that people particularly dislike Kemi Badenoch; they just don't have an opinion about Kemi Badenoch.
She's not that good, though. So, that's the problem.
Well, they do need someone that can grab attention in a similar way that Nigel Farage can. Otherwise, they'll just be completely eclipsed, which is what's happening at the moment.
But the reason why Reform is doing so well versus the Conservatives is because we get the sense that they're actually a Conservative party with strong Conservative, if you want to call it that, centre-right views. And that's what many people seem to be clinging onto. The issue with the Conservative Party, they were too centre, and Boris Johnson, like I said, wasn't Conservative enough. So why would you go back to a centrist politician to be leader when people left the Conservatives to go to Reform because they wanted to get away from that centre ground. They want something that is... No, the problem with politics now, on both sides, people are trying to please everybody. And that's why we have this grey area of central politics. We need strong left or strong right.
Well, I just wonder if he was the person that started to recognise, with the help of Dominic Cummings, that the old left-right divide doesn't really work anymore. He actually saw that there was another split going on, and that's what Brexit highlighted.
Why is Reform doing well then?
Well, because they are realigning. They're saying, actually, what matters is where people see themselves. Do they identify with the place they were born, or do they identify with where they want to be in life? And is that a more realistic split? Do you think that? Do you think that actually Boris Johnson, in that moment in Brexit, managed to highlight something which is about the future of this country rather than about the past?
Yeah, well, I think Boris Johnson was a very good campaigner. And I think that basically Reform have won his vote base. His vote base was people who are, socially somewhat conservative, but economically actually somewhat left-wing. So Boris Johnson talked about levelling up. He wasn't particularly ideological when it came to shrinking the state. What brought Boris Johnson down is that he's a completely venal, self-serving man. So the moment he entered power, the whole thing collapsed because he's more interested in his own ego than ever getting anything done. But I think the politics he was speaking to is one that does actually have a lot of traction in this country.
But let's look at those. Let's look at the fundamentals of conservatism. Low taxes, low on migration unless it's useful to the country, harsh on illegal migration, law and order, not really placing the green agenda at the top. Boris had none of those at his top priority. He increased taxes.
But that sensible centrist conservatism you're talking about is not winning votes at the moment because it's not getting noticed. It's not cutting through. And as Michael says,
it did locally with Reform. It did. We saw with the local elections. It did win the vote.
With a strong character like Nigel Farage at the head of it, who takes that flak and who seems to people to represent something that they understand. I tell you who is very interesting. Avril on Facebook says exactly what you're saying. Bring back sensible centrist conservatism that challenges and contradicts Farage rather than rushing to agree with him. Cameron was the last decent Tory in charge. Discuss. Hayden on Facebook says they will split the vote, allowing Labour in again. Under the current voting system, it has to be either Tories or Reform or a voting pact. Isn't that the truth, though, Michael, that Boris Johnson re-enters the fray, takes some of that vote away from Reform and from Nigel Farage, because that, a lot of those voters could occupy either seat. Labour could be the big winner from a return for Boris.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Maybe Labour would be sort of hoping that Boris Johnson returns because, Labour set out all of their strategy as how do we sort of destroy the Conservatives. That's why constantly when they entered power, they talked about how the Tories had wrecked the economy over the past 14 years because they wanted people to say, well, we're not too keen on Labour, but the Tories are even worse. That was Labour's strategy for winning the next general election. The problem is, at the moment, it doesn't look like the Tories are their opponent at the next general election. It's going to be Nigel Farage. And they haven't worked out what their attack is against Nigel Farage yet. So for Labour, it would be ideal if the Tories improved a little bit so they could properly split the right-wing vote. So maybe they want Boris back and they want Boris to do reasonably well, but not that well.
OK, who's the current leader you see within the Tory party? Is it Robert Jenrick? Because he came second, didn't he?
I think the things that Robert Jenrick say speaks to the Reform voter. The problem with Robert Jenrick is he's disingenuous. Where did he come all of a sudden with these views? He didn't have these views up till recently, and I've realised that the current voter doesn't forget. That's why Keir Starmer's having a hard time.
If not Boris, who? That is the question. Ooh. Have a think, because we're going to take a call.
Go back to Rishi.
What? Go back to Rishi.
He's a man of numbers. I think if we were a bit more patient, we would have seen the economy improve. Yes, he may not have been someone that you would go and have a beer with, but he knew his figures, he was measured, and he was the more kind of, had those conservative ideals, but a little bit more centrist.
He will never escape standing in the rain. That's what I would say.
But we can't put that on politics.
Well, anyway, let's see what Carl says. He's in Liverpool. Carl, would you have Boris Johnson back as leader of the Tory party in frontline politics?
Well, my thought is, I'll give you a prediction. Nigel Farage will rejoin the Tory party, invited into the shadow cabinet, and he will be the next leader of the Tory party. There's no need to worry at all about Boris Johnson. It's Nigel Farage will lead the Tory party into the next election.
OK, what's the timescale for this then, Carl? What's the mechanism by which that happens?
I think Labour will go to full term.
Yeah.
And I honestly do think he'll be invited in very, very soon. They'll get rid of Badenoch. And as soon as they get rid of Badenoch, he gets invited back into the Tory party.
No.
It's only, he's a Tory through and through. He always has been.
We're talking about Farage here. We're talking about Farage.
We're talking about Farage.
Farage has set up
Boris
reform.
Sorry?
So he's basically you're saying that he's used reform as a stalking horse to get the Tory party leadership.
Just as he did with UKIP.
OK. I mean,
No, I think he's finished. I think if Nigel Farage does that, he will be finished and he will be coined as a careerist because he's done a bit too much flip-flopping, UKIP, Brexit Party.
It's not harming him at the moment in the polls, is it?
It isn't, but there has been a bit of contention. That's why people have, some who would have ardently followed him, considering, OK, watching what Rupert's doing, watching what Ben Habib's doing, because some are saying that Nigel Farage is disingenuous. Like, why does he disappear when the going gets tough? If he really sticks at reform, stays with reform and continues on his journey, I think that people will think this is a person who really could lead. If he jumps ship, always accusing the Conservatives of what they did, then joins them, he will be disingenuous.
Let's take another call. Flora's in Nottinghamshire. What do you reckon? Should Boris be back on the front line leading the Tory party, Flora?
Most definitely not.
OK.
A stranger to the truth. He can't tell the truth if hell had him. And Kemi Badenoch, they've got to get rid of her because she's just a silly little girl playing at politics. Now, there's another fellow on the Tory front bench, James Cleverly. He's truthful, he answers questions, and he's sitting there waiting in the wings, and I don't know why anybody doesn't think of him.
Well, he had the chance. He was in the running for Tory leader last time out. Came third, I think. So this is the thing. He's got to be voted for by Tory members, and they went for Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, and I don't know why, because she's just a silly little kid playing at politics.
OK, let's take another call. Thank you, Flora. Marcy's in London. Marcy, would you love to see Boris Johnson back as leader of the Tory party?
Yes, I think so. I think we need some, and I'm not wanting to swear balls. We need some guts. We need some energy that is going to sort of ball crash the gates because, we're sitting behind a fence at the moment and being very casual about things, and we're really too small to just.
Why do we need big personalities like that? Because we had a period where we did have big personalities, and they were on the front line making a lot of noise. Now we've got a quieter form of government, which is not bothering us quite so much, to be frank. Why do we need to have personalities rather than policies that hopefully work?
Well, we're not a big entity, We're not a big entity, and we need to make some sort of impact. If he has the right supportive energy to balance what he has, because you do notice it and you do listen. Unfortunately, as I said to your colleague, I actually had a meeting. I run businesses and actually had a meeting with Kemi and found her totally useless. But I think if he has the right empathy around him in support, I think he can do a good job. No one man is an island.
He had all of that support. He had a huge majority. And yet the reports from within Number 10 was that it was utter chaos.
I can imagine so. As I said, he's got the character, but everybody's got a field to play. And that's it's a team effort. Okay. His characteristics has benefited and impacted some elements which we can look at today,
Okay.
you know. But team effort is vital, you know. I know you say he's had, you know, the right support or the team effort around him, but they have to be the right essence of contribution. You know, if you're a school teacher, you're not going to be an accountant or somebody in finance for the Prime Minister,
Okay.
are you?
Yeah. Thank you, Marcy. Thanks for that. I you know, you were making the line, Michael, about charisma being important. But we also get the chaos with Boris. We don't get that structure. It doesn't feel like decisions are necessarily well thought through. Do we really want to go back to those days when it felt like every week was something new? You know, what now?
No, I mean, I think it would be terrible if he became Prime Minister again. I think we're in a very depressing situation whereby Boris Johnson actually looks like a kind of reasonable bet for the Conservatives, by the way. I think if he led the Conservatives, he still wouldn't win a general election because there are a lot of people who are still very annoyed about what he did when he was in government. I think the fact that he looks like a decent option is more a sort of...
Sorry state we're in.
Yeah, it is more a sign of the sorry state the Conservatives are in than the amount of affection that the country has for Boris Johnson.
And also the state of politics generally, isn't it? Where this cutting through, as you say, seemed to be so important to win votes, and then you wonder what you've got when they're actually in power. Right, we'll take one call. David's in Lancashire. David, what do you reckon? Does Boris make sense to you as a leader of the Tory party?
No, he's a liar and he's a cheat. And he's a buffoon. When he was in power, all the lies he told when we were under COVID rules, people forget this when they say, "Oh, how marvellous Boris was." He's a joke. That's what a part of the downfall last time. I've never known, I'm 80 years old, I've never known a Prime Minister so struffy on the world stage. The amount of money, public money, he wasted when he was Lord Mayor of Liverpool. Lord Mayor of London.
We have to leave it there, I'm afraid, David, but your point's well made. And it's true to say there will be those who lost loved ones in COVID who will never forgive him or members of the Tory party for what they did. But we will leave it there. Thank you for all of your calls on that.